right, all right, all right. This ain't just a show. This is a platform. Veteran built, battle tested. Welcome to the MisFitNation. Yeah! Mic in a room, built from boots on the ground, now we breaking the rules. 2 vets, 1 leader, painting the sound, turn scars into sermons, let them echo around. Authors with truth, musicians with fire, actors backstage chasing something higher. Entrepreneurs bleeding just to get ahead. If you fought for your dream, yeah, you are what you said. If they told you no, if you still came back, if you fell to your knees but you stayed on track, this is your voice, this is your flame. Say it loud, remember the name. No salvation, just elevation. We rise again. From the fight to the end. We are the MisFitNation. No damn labels, no damn cages. If you're still breathing, you belong. Turn it up. This is our song. Yeah. This is our song. Yeah. Veterans standing with ghosts in the chest. First responders running in while the world second guess. Gold star names carved deep in the soul. Your story ain't over, we carry the whole. Coaches teaching mindset, breaking the chain, turning Billy alive into owning the pain. Truth over polish, scars on display. If it's real, let it bleed. That's the misfit play. If it's heavy right now, and the dark feels close. If it's heavy right now, and the dark feels close. If it's heavy right now, and the dark feels close. It's stop right now. We're the more than you know. 988, don't walk alone. Veterans press 1, bring it home. Don't trade forever for tonight. You're still needed in this fight. We are the MisFitNation, built from scars and dedication. We rise again. From the fight to the end. We are the MisFitNation. Every voice is fabrication. From the silence to the scream, we're strong. Welcome home, you belong. You belong. You belong. Oh wait, you. Oh wait, you belong.
All right. Welcome back to the MisFitNation and the Sunday after dinner edition. I hope you all had a great and safe 4th of July. You all have all 10 fingers, all 10 toes, no disfigurement on your body, no burns, and everyone made it out of yesterday's celebration safely and back to a nice restful day today to watch the World Cup soccer, NASCAR, WNBA, or just, unwind and relax from yesterday and get ready to go back to work tomorrow. But tonight, we have a great guest. It reminds us that history isn't just something we read in textbooks. It's something families carry with them for generations. Joining us tonight is author Heidi Langbein-Allen, who transformed her father's 16 cassette tapes into a powerful memoir, Save the Last Bullet, Memoir of a Boy Soldier in Hitler's Army. Her father, Wilhelm Langbein, was only 13 years old when he was taken from his family and forced into Hitler's army as a child soldier, sent to the Eastern Front during the final months of World War II. He witnessed unimaginable horrors, survived against impossible odds, and eventually dedicated his life to promoting democracy and peace throughout Europe. Her work isn't simply about documenting history. It's about preserving truth, honoring resilience, and ensuring future generations understand the devastating consequences of hatred, propaganda, and war. Today, we're going to explore family legacy, courage, healing, writing, and why these stories matter now more than ever. So join me in welcoming Heidi to the MisFitNation show. Welcome, Heidi.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be in your show and to be able to tell my father's story.
This is going to be an awesome story especially for the audience here. We have a lot of combat veterans here who would love to hear the angle from a 13-year-old who was conscripted into a war he definitely didn't want to be in. At 13, especially, he probably wanted to be doing anything better than that at that time in his life, and then go to the Eastern Front, and was pretty cold on the Eastern Front and not a good time fighting on that side of the war. And I'm just glad that he was able to document it in those cassettes, and you were able to take that and turn it into a memoir.
Yeah, that took some doing. My father, as many other war veterans, especially of that generation, I never wanted to talk about it. He never spoke of it. I kept hearing him waking up at night, screaming, but I didn't know why. And that's pretty much all I knew growing up. I finally wore him down, though. After he retired, I kept bugging him. I said, "Hey, this is important. You need to do this." So he finally relented and put it on 16 tapes and sent it to me and my sister. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you beat him up for a long time to get that done. That's awesome.
Yeah. Many years. Yeah.
Wow. Share us a little bit about your growing up. You grew up through his eyes too. So you had a long history in Europe, and then now you're in the United States, of course. Tell us a little about your story, how you came about doing this, and why did you start writing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I never set out to write a book. I simply wanted my father to record the story for the family. I wanted my children to understand the past, because I think that these personal accounts, especially these personal accounts of war, can't be found in history books. And this is important. It's important to preserve that history, because otherwise it just gets lost. The person dies and all of those stories go with them. And it is important to preserve them for people to understand the broader matrix of the consequences of war, the long-term emotional trauma, the consequences of these events that is seen through people like you and me, hopefully resonate, right? And bring something that a history book doesn't.
Definitely. History books put in the things that they believe everyone wants to see. They don't really capture the whole story of everything. They capture the big tidbits here and there. Yeah. And then it takes someone like your dad to, after you broke them down, to make those cassettes and share that knowledge. And like you said, that generation, no matter what side of the war they were on, they were just proud men. And they didn't share their story of things unless you sat them down like you did, and you just finally got them to break down after he retired. So that's a long time. It's a long fight to get that going.
Yeah, and he carried that trauma like I think all soldiers do for, the rest of his life. And he was told when he got back, alive, that was the first thing he was told by his family. They said, this never happened. You shall never speak of it again.
Oh, wow.
And that was it.
And that generation, when they were told to do something, they just did it. And he was told not to talk about it. So I'm not going to talk about this. I'm just going to turn my life and go forward, and not realizing the things that were in his head that he'd battle forever.
Oh, he did battle. He did battle a lot of demons, because he had no idea what this war was really about until after he got out of it. And then he wasn't allowed to talk about it, right? So he carried that, and it was a twice defeated nation, and Germany's carried that, the guilt, the generational guilt, with it still to this day. Germany, I could feel it when I was growing up. I was a student in actually overseas. I grew up in France mostly, but in a German school. And one of our field trips when I was 15 years old was to a concentration camp. They took us to Dachau in Munich at age 15 so that we would understand our history. And I'm so grateful for our teacher, to our teachers for having done that, because it opened my eyes to the reality of this, of that war in particular, because you had, this perfect example of totalitarianism and how they brought a population to be manipulated into morally defending indefensible causes. Right.
Right. I had the opportunity to go to Dachau in 2019, I believe. It was just before COVID.
Yeah.
We went. My wife and I went there. My wife's a history teacher, so she's like you. She loves history, so we wanted to go there. And what struck me, you see the pictures of it in the history books, but they're always like small pictures of it, so you don't realize how big that place was, and how big that field was where they'd line up the prisoners and the people in the camp in that long field, and how many had to be standing there and then pushed back into those buildings. And you could just feel it when you go to feel the coldness when you got there. It was amazing to me, and something that left an impression on me.
Yeah, and Dachau has the infamous distinction of having been the first concentration camp.
Yeah.
And it was mainly for political prisoners in the beginning. And the most prominent guests at the concentration camp, the first two inmates, actually were the Habsburg heirs to the throne, which he made sure he imprisoned so they would never, ever come to power. Because Hitler hated the Habsburg Empire because they were all about diversity and tolerance of multicultural and multi-ethnic groups of people. Right? And so that was, yeah. So they both died. Both brothers died.
Yeah, and of course they had where they would incinerate the bodies and such. And they went from the small one to the big one because there were so many people there, and trying to get rid of them so quickly when the Allied forces were getting closer. It's just, and then they told us that they have all the students go there. I guess during high school, they all have to make a trip there to witness it and understand what happened there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So understanding your history so you don't repeat it, I guess, is the
pretty sobering. Yes, and you kind of wonder if we ever do learn anything. And it's interesting because I just recently was thinking about that because we said, well, history doesn't quite repeat itself, but it certainly has patterns, right? Cyclical patterns that seem to come back, right? And the pendulum swings, right? From over decades. It swings from one sort of geopolitical landscape to the other, and you keep seeing sort of recurring patterns. But I have a feeling that we when we say we don't learn anything, I think we do. I think, and maybe that's a jaded comment, but I think our leaders do understand. And, maybe some of these things are choices, and that's the sobering thought, right? That we need to preserve democracy at all costs, right? Because, it may not be perfect, but it's the best we got.
Oh, definitely. And you see the world stage, you can see how they all they make decisions based on what they believe is going to work for their nation.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it just doesn't make sense to a lot of people. It doesn't make sense to many of us.
Right.
But you don't know what they're thinking or what's being told to them in from their left shoulder, right shoulder, demons or their advisors that sit there and tell them what's good and what's bad and what needs to happen.
Yeah. And
then the backside of it is the soldier on the ground that is doing the work, not the person that's in the suit giving the speeches. It's a soldier on the ground, the one man or woman that's out there fighting that has to make other decisions now for the rest of their lives and has to deal with it like your dad and his generation.
Absolutely. That's the whole point of preserving these stories, to get people to reflect on the devastation of war and to bring it close to people, to young people too, especially because I think that generationally, the further we're generationally removed from wars, the more it somehow appears to be an option for people. And I think it's as people don't have the memory of the war, right? And the military community, is small, right?
Yes.
It's small. So those are the only people that really know, right? And us, well, I'm married to a Navy veteran. So he was in Desert Storm, and I come from generation of, on both sides of my family, of soldiers, right? My father and his father fought in World War One, and on my mother's side, her grandfather fought in World War One as well, and in the Cuban American War.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. We got that comment in the front of the chat already here. It's from Jane Babcock, a friend of the show here.
Yeah.
She said, as a child born in upstate New York who lived in South Orange, New Jersey, age 10 to 13, a couple of her friends had grandparents who still had the tattoos.
Oh, yeah.
Her grandfather served in World War One and World War Two. Her dad in World War Two. Keeping history through generations is vital. Then she said, keep up the good work, Rich and Heidi. Thanks, Jane.
Absolutely. I actually, after I published the book, I was stunned that I had people coming and wanting to tell me their story. So people came to me to tell me their story, so much so that I am publishing a second book, and it's an anthology of young World War II survivors. It's their true stories, and they're all from different backgrounds. It's just dramatic survival stories, and I'm so glad my publisher agreed to give me a publication date. It's going to be next year in June, so I'll be able to share that with the community, because I think it's just that fabric of history we need to keep alive.
That is awesome, and you basically opened the floodgate, or maybe opened them to say, hey, if she can tell her dad's story, I want to be able to share mine, and she looks like the voice I want to use to do this. Outstanding.
Well, I think it's because it's the story. It's a story that's unusual because it's from the other side, right? It's from the bad guys, right? From the losing side. And so I think that, war, I call it just as of an equal opportunity destroyer, right? So for the civilian population, for the soldier on the ground, right? For the victims, for the voiceless victims of war, yes. The devastation and the horror and the loss and the despair is the same no matter what side you're on, right? And I think that's what doesn't come through, of course, in the history books, because you get the official political events, but you don't get the true story of human suffering that we keep putting ourselves through over and over again.
And you won't get that until you do something like you've done, listen to your dad's cassettes, or talk to these other people who, like you said, from diverse backgrounds, who come forward and say, I want to share my story too. If we don't listen to their stories go to the grave with them, for one. And two, now with their stories, we get a whole other vision of what actually was going on during this time.
Yeah. And there are a lot of events and facts that are not well known, especially on the losing side, because that story is never written, right?
Right.
And I thought that's why people then felt like they got a voice through that and wanted to tell me their stories, which I found really just heartening, right? That people found the courage then to tell their own stories, and so I'll get to share them soon.
That is amazing. When you finally got those cassettes, what was it like listening to those cassettes with such emotional memories from your dad on them?
Yeah, that was pretty wild. So I couldn't honestly believe my luck. And I think what happened is my father in his 70s, after he retired, I said, Dad, you've had such a remarkable life, right? You survived this horrible war, miraculously, and lived to tell. And then, you developed yourself into a true advocate of democracy, right? My father did in fact dedicate his life, once he found out the truth, and went into depression for a long time, and finally emerged from that with actually the help of a British soldier who helped him recover and find hope, he dedicated his life to the defense of democracy and to the development of democracy in Europe. And he earned the Medal of European Merit in 1979
Wow.
for the advancement of democracy in Europe, and then worked for NATO at the end of his career for the last 15 years. He was actually a civil servant. He was a lawyer by trade, and he worked for the German Department of Defense in the Foreign Service. And so the last 15 years he spent with NATO. He, for your military listeners, this might be something they're aware of. The NATO fighter jet until now was the Tornado aircraft, right?
Yeah.
And my father wrote the contract. I have the original. It's like
Wow.
200 pages. Yeah. And so he was very proud of that. And he became, so to answer your question, he actually prompted this because so I had bugged him to do this, and he did. And he was, incredibly honest in telling his story. Because my father, that's one thing that I learned from him and that I cherished really, is that he was uncompromisingly honest. Like he was going to tell it like it was, right? And he, didn't mince words. He told me I know that he left things out. I know that there are things he couldn't bring himself to talk about, but he told a lot. And then I listened to it in fascination, and I put it away for like 9 years. And then in 2016, my father started getting really concerned about geopolitical events in general. He said, I see a dangerous trend toward totalitarianism and toward the pendulum swinging to autocracies and to polarization and to folks becoming, indoctrinated and becoming extreme in their views. And he says that's very dangerous. And I'm worried that my whole, legacy, everything I worked for my whole life is in jeopardy. And so that prompted me to pull those tapes out, going, what was I thinking? My father's now not in good health. He's 86 years old. He had to be, put in a retirement home because of health issues. And so all of a sudden I had a sense of urgency. So I went to translate the tapes from German because my kids speak Spanish, but they don't speak German. I tried, but they mutinied 2 years into it, and they said, nope, this is too hard. We can't do this. So I had to translate it into English. So that was my whole mission, was to translate it into English so that they could listen and or read their grandfather's story. And I just happened to mention it to a colleague at work who happens to be a writer. And he said, oh, no, that's a book. And I laughed him out of the room. I'm like, you are out of your mind. And he just didn't give up. He dragged me to a writer's group. And, the rest is history. I let him convince me. I guess I finally saw that maybe I just never thought I was capable, right? But I did get his point that this was a story worth telling to a broader audience, right? And so that's how the book came to be.
That's amazing. It's always good to have that one person push you forward to get into that uncomfortable arena and do what you've done.
Yeah, I was terrified the whole way.
But you did it, so that's what matters. When you went through the process and you were going through all the tapes, and I'm sure you were going back to him and asking him questions, was there anything that really surprised you during your research or interviewing him? It was a pleasant surprise at that point that he was very willing to talk about it.
and he was welcoming, our weekly calls. So I set up weekly calls with him. He lived in Spain. My parents retired in Spain. My mother was a Spaniard, and she made him promise. He dragged her all over the world. So she said, no, we're retiring in Spain. So he was there. So we have 9 hours difference, right? But I made sure that, on Sunday mornings, which was his evening, we'd always call, have an hour, and he would welcome those times. And so that was a pleasant surprise. And he was very open, although some things that I asked him, even point blank, he would get quiet and he'd say, yeah, I don't remember. So I didn't press him, on some things. And one of the most shocking parts, really of his story was that when he returned, and this is, of course, fast forwarding through the story, and I'll tell it a little better. But so he makes it back. His parents think he's dead, right?
Oh, wow.
They've not heard of, and he's their only child. And my grandfather was a World War I veteran, and so they think their child is dead. And all of a sudden he shows up. They haven't heard from him in a year and a half. And he shows up emaciated. So he was 6 feet tall and he was all of like 90 pounds.
Oh, wow.
When he got out. And he must not obviously have looked like himself. So he had a Africa Corps uniform, and the Americans had removed all of the insignia, and he had no other clothes, so he'd been wearing that for a year, and I believe he was wearing the cap, the Africa Corps cap. And his father didn't. So he got to his village. His village had been completely razed to the ground. It was 90% destroyed. They had put up posts, I think with street names to guide people, and the church and the train station were still standing, the Catholic church and the train station. So he was able to orient himself, and he figured that he could find where his house would have been, which was completely destroyed. And so he broke down. He thought his parents were probably dead. Then he made his way to another relative's house, and that was standing. And so he ran into his father, and his father didn't recognize him.
Wow.
But then what his father did was shocking. His father stared at him, turned around, and left without saying a word. And he didn't speak to him for months.
Ooh.
And they never once, even after they, wounds mend, right, over time, they never spoke about that, ever.
Wow.
And my father never quite understood that reaction. And the closest he could get to it was that that we talked about that. And he says, you never know your parents, first of all, because they had a whole life before you were even born. So they were, they had, you only know a portion of their lives. And he knew that his father was a World War I veteran, and he had been hit with mustard gas, and he had seen, I think, horrible things. And I think what he concluded was that his father turned his fear and his despair of having lost his son into anger. It turned into anger when he saw him, almost like how dare you have put us through this, right? Through this ordeal, and perhaps that might be what happened, right? My grandfather couldn't deal with his emotions. And at that generation, even more than the World War II generation, absolutely was stoic, right? They would never speak about emotions or, God forbid, the war. Right?
Yeah. And like you said, mustard gas was tested on them. And that was the first time chemical warfare was actually used in large scale. So they've seen a lot of things that in that war that really didn't transpire after that war, except in little pockets around the world, not in full scale use. Yeah. But they've seen a lot of bad things, like French warfare and all that stuff, and enclosed combat, close quarters combat, which now we're seeing, in Ukraine with Russia and Ukraine doing trench
Yes.
warfare now. You see that whole rotational, like we were talking about earlier, history tends to come back and bite us, and they learned a lesson, but they're still doing it.
Yes, unfortunately. And that was, my father's fear that we would have to revisit this in our generation. His story is, I think, remarkable again, because he managed to survive. He wasn't supposed to. Right. So when he was taken at 13 by the Nazis, this was a program they had, and it was supposedly to protect children, city kids, from heavy Allied bombing. But it was a convenient pretense to separate them from the influence of their parents and the church, separate them from their families, to completely indoctrinate them into the Nazi ideology, and in particular to groom them, the boys, for the front. Because, in 1943, when they took my father and his whole classroom, it wasn't just him. So they would take the entire classroom with the teacher. So the teacher had no choice, right? And the whole classroom went with a teacher and a Nazi handler who would basically be there for surveillance and watch every move that teacher made to ensure that everything went just according to plan, right? And so this program was supposed to be voluntary. And so when parents failed to muster enthusiasm for the program, because, they would lose their kids. And apparently they didn't have that many takers, or not enough. The Nazis devised a very clever way to encourage parents to do the right thing. And in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is where my father grew up, which is the northwestern area of Germany bordering the Netherlands and Belgium. Okay. Germany had different provinces. They were semi-autonomous, and so for that province, then it was illegal. Well, it was illegal in the whole country to not send your children to secondary school. You had to. It was mandatory to send your children to school, and if you didn't do that, it was punishable. It was I believe, a criminal offense, and it was punishable with imprisonment. So what they did is they closed all the schools. So the parents were immediately in violation unless they took their kids to the program. And the program is called Kinderlandverschickung, the KLV. And there were similar programs in other countries, like in England. They had these protection programs, but this particular one was, had that more sinister reason for existing. It wasn't just to protect them; it was to indoctrinate them and to give them military training, right? Which is what happened to my dad, right? Right. So there he was, with a little, tag on his chest, and with all his schoolmates, and they got shipped off to the south of Germany, very far, right? And because he was from northwestern Germany, so he was on the border with Switzerland. He ended up in Lake Constance, and they were relatively lucky at the time because they got put in with host families. Other kids got sent directly to camps. My father did end up in a camp, but at the beginning he was with a host family, so it eased the transition a little bit because, these are 13-year-olds, and I think, and there were 12, and they were as young. They took him as young as 10, between 10 and 14, right? And so he was extremely homesick, and I think the kids in that generation were less mature, I think, than children today, because we have so much more access to information today, and so much more access to media. Back then, the communities were smaller, more isolated, were very traditional. So children really didn't get it. They stayed children, I think, longer, right? In that sense, it's sort of the naivete and the innocence. And so they were extremely homesick, right? And the older kids would kind of take care of the younger kids, trying to be like their surrogate parents. The host families had no choice, right? So they were not getting any subsidies or anything. They were just told, okay, so you're taking on a couple extra kids, and make it happen. And this, he actually got put in with a family where the husband was at war, and the mother, the lady, was had 6 kids, so it was another mouth to feed, and they had no food, right? So they would eat. He recalled eating what they called flour soup at night. They would have sometimes just that one meal, and it was you would singe flour on a pan. And then mix it with water, and that was the soup.
Oh wow!
That's what they would eat. So yeah, so it was it was hard times everywhere, of course. But he tried to run away. It made it onto at Christmas time, 1943, and he made it onto the train. But of course they caught him. So, as he got off the train, they were there waiting for him. And so he got very scared because it was the Hitler Youth. So the Hitler Youth was patrolling these trains, and they were helping the police. And you have to remember, so maybe I need to go farther back. So Germany was a country that was ruled by fear and intimidation, right? So let me maybe take a step back for your listeners. So in 1930, my father's born in 1930. So Hitler's already in the background, right? And in 1933, in January of 1933, Hitler gets appointed chancellor. He doesn't get elected, and that's a thing that folks might not know. He got appointed by the president because the elites in Germany were worried about the weakness of the Weimar Republic, which was a democracy. And it was one of those coalition democracies where nobody gets along and you've got like 6, 7 political parties. And so it was unstable. And they were very concerned about, internal civil war and stuff. And so they thought that they could control Hitler, and Hitler was going to be a stabilizing influence. And well, we know what happened after that. So he gets appointed chancellor. Within a month, the Reichstag, which is the parliament in Germany, mysteriously burns down, and Hitler immediately uses that, to blame the communists, and persuades the president to enact basically emergency powers. So he becomes at that point already a quasi autocratic ruler because he has emergency powers, which he of course never gave up after that. Those obliterated, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. You couldn't, protest. So all of that was shut down, and then they went very, very hard against the opposing parties with great violence. They had the SA, which was the precursor of the SS, intimidating the population. Most of the political opponents, the Communist Party and Socialist Party, all got imprisoned in concentration camps and or murdered. So they didn't play. So people were, it was extreme intimidation. And so that's, and then there were elections, which the elites supported. So they got a huge influx of money. He still, even after all that massive intimidation and having gotten rid of all of the opponents, still didn't get the majority. So this is something that I think most of the world doesn't actually know how he came to power. The population, most certainly a large number of the population opposed Hitler, but he, came to power. Even though not winning the full majority, he, went into a coalition, and that was the end of that, right? So then he immediately enacted laws that were constitutional amendments that took away all personal freedoms and gave him the authority to pass laws without Congress. So that's it. That's the end of your democracy right there. From that point on, fear and intimidation were pervasive on the streets. I mean, people couldn't speak up. If they did, they would be dragged away literally from their homes, and or their businesses would get shut down, and they would get, imprisoned. So people very quickly found out that they had to either emigrate, right? They had to either leave, or they had to stay quiet.
Wow.
And so that's the background, right? My father grows up, he's 3 years old. So in 35, the infamous Nuremberg laws came into effect right before he gets into school, where, the laws against the Jews, came to pass, where they stripped them of their citizenship. They couldn't have what they called interracial marriages. They were prohibited, punishable by imprisonment as well. So they forced, couples that were married, that were Jewish and German to divorce against their will, or they would be put in concentration camps. And so, and the Jewish part of the Jewish partner would go to the concentration camp anyway. The non-Jewish partner would have to divorce. And so we have a very interesting story about that. The neighbors of my grandparents were such a couple. And my dad, so again, when he's like 5 years old or so, he's playing with the neighbor kid. And my grandmother had some illness. We've never found out what it was, but she was often sick. And so she would have the neighbor take care of my father. And so, long story short, this was a couple where the man was Jewish and the woman was German. She refused to divorce him at risk of her own life. And so, interestingly, they took him. He went to the Theresienstadt concentration camp, but they left her. But instead of imprisoning her, they left her to her own devices. They prohibited anybody to have any contact with her. She could not be employed, and they took away her food stamps. So basically, they left her to starve.
Yeah.
And so, at the end of the war, fast forward around, in 45, when things got really bad, the SS was rounding up stray soldiers that would maybe have gotten separated from their units, and they would shoot them or hang them from the nearest tree as traitors, because you had to be a deserter or a coward, and that was not permitted. It was victory or death. So you had to die. And then they were rounding up in desperation, because, they'd already lost the war.
Right.
But in desperation, they were rabid about rounding up anybody they may have missed. And so they went after these people that had somehow been missed. So my grandparents hid the lady and her little son, who was about, I think, maybe 6 years younger than my father, who my father played with, in the coal cellar, at risk to their own lives. And the beautiful moral to the story is, things sometimes work out. She survived. They made it, and the gentleman made it. He was alive. He got out of the concentration camp and walked home, and he had a shoe store. And because of the love they had and the loyalty, it's a beautiful love story. He agreed to stay in Germany. The shoe store is still there. It's run by their daughter, by this gentleman's daughter, and I got to meet her. I didn't even know she existed.
Wow.
She corroborated the whole story. She says, "Yep, that's what my grandparents told me. It's all true." Right.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. It's the store is still there. Yeah, it's really cool. So, just tell you that hope does, come up in different places where you least expect them. Right? It's sort of gives you sometimes hope that there is a brighter future somewhere, right?
Definitely, and to have that basically the full circle of that, the whole battle, basically, taking the husband, her almost starving to death. Basically, they tried to kill her on her own, and surviving through your your dad's parents basically hiding in the cold, and then
Yeah, and
now,
that makes me feel good in a way, because it even though they kept their heads down, right, and they didn't say anything, and they just try to, live. In the end, they did the right thing, right?
Yeah.
They were very brave in protecting their neighbor like that. So I'd like to think that was that was their contribution.
yes.
But and they never talked about that either. It's very interesting. Yeah. So my dad had to pry it out of him afterwards and that's when he found out, after the war, when he was shown the pictures and he was shown, that's something that he didn't want to believe, right? When they were taken prisoner, and I'm jumping around, but they gave themselves up to the Americans, what was left of his unit, and the Americans would show them pictures of the Holocaust. They'd show them pictures of the concentration camps. And my father and his comrades refused to believe it. They thought it was propaganda. It was because it was so horrifying. It was so absolutely horrifying. They said, no, there's no way. This is Photoshop. Like, it can't be true. And because you've been told my father had been told when he was 13, and they took him and then they gave him the military training. They said, they showed up at school when he was in that with the host family. The SS shows up, right, and picks the biggest boys. My father, unfortunately for him, was big and strong. And they picked the 3 biggest ones out of the class. They said, you have been bestowed the greatest honor there is. You get to lay down your life for the Führer in battle against the enemy, and you will protect the fatherland against the Russians. So what's a 13-year-old kid, he was 14 at this point, to believe, right? To do. And going back to, what he was growing up into, he goes into school in 1936. They've changed. When they did the Nuremberg laws in 1935, the Nazis got wise to the fact very quickly, and they did it very effectively, that molding the young generation into unquestioning subjects, right? They were fiercely loyal was the best way to guarantee, the ideology surviving, right? And so they were extremely good at doing that and manipulating the children. So they changed all of the school books. So by the time my father got into school, the elementary school books, the old ones would say things like, honor your parents and God, right? And give thanks to God, and that type of language that you would find typically in any school book in that era. They changed the language. It was almost like neuro-linguistic programming, right? I don't think that they coined NLP yet, but they knew about it. And so they changed the wording to, instead of God, it was Hitler. And we owe him everything. And instead of family, it was blood and soil and the fatherland. But this is a 6-year-old, right? And this is what they're hearing all day long. They're seeing it in school. Their teachers are teaching this. At home, there is surveillance. These children are taught to tell on their parents, right? They're saying, oh, but this is what you hear at home, don't you, as well, right? And so, God forbid, a poor kid, a 6-year-old or 7-year-old might be honest and say, well, no. The parents immediately were in trouble. And a lot of parents got in trouble and were dragged away to prison because of that, right? So that's this background, right? And then you've got the Hitler Youth, right? So I always liken it to the Boy Scouts, because that's what it was. That's what it used to be before Hitler. It was a Boy Scout organization, and it had a precursor, which was the same like the Cub Scouts for the younger ones. And it was a voluntary, outdoor, association, very much like any Boy Scout type organization, until Hitler took it over, right? And so when Hitler took it over, it became tainted with all of the propaganda and the politicization, and they were teaching the kids, paramilitary songs, and they were, the games that they played would be, target practice and throw, wood grenades at each other, for play. Of course, the kids, little boys, they think that's great stuff.
Yeah.
And then and that was supposedly voluntary until it wasn't. And so by the time my father turned 10, which is the time frame in which these Cub Scout like Jungvolk organization would take the boys, it was mandatory. So you were automatically enrolled. So by the time my father hits 10 years old, 1940, it's been mandatory since the war started in September of 39. So there's no escaping it. You just go into this organization, the Jungvolk, from ages 10 to 14, then you're automatically put into Hitler Youth, and then you automatically go to war. If you don't go before, right? And as times got desperate, they picked them younger and younger, right? So that's the backdrop, right, that my father is in.
Yeah.
He's being told that he's defending his fatherland, and it's not like he can say no. So, and so then fast forward then, so he's 14, the SS is there, they tell him this great honor has been bestowed on you, and which of the forces do you want to go to? Surprisingly, they let them pick, which was interesting. And they gave him a choice. They told him they could go to the SS, where they would be very well fed. So that was their big incentive. Or they could go to the regular armed forces. And to a man, the three, they hadn't talked to each other before because they were just pulled out of the room. To a man, they all three said, "Oh, we'll just go to the regular army." And my father told me it's because they knew already then, even just sensed it, I guess, that the SS was incredibly creepy.
Yeah.
And dangerous looking. Even though they didn't necessarily have a lot of reference points, but they knew, right? They wanted nothing to do with them. So they put them. They said, well, we're going to put you through 2 months of training, and then you go back to school, and then you just wait your turn, and we'll come and pick you up when the time comes. So this is 44. My father's 14. They give him 2 months training, pulled him out of school. They taught him how to use a machine gun and a pistol and this anti-tank weapon that's similar to a bazooka. It's called the Panzerfaust, and it was extremely effective. It was a very modern weapon, and it was apparently extremely efficient, but it was a single shot weapon, could only be shot once. Wow. So that's what they equipped them with, and they taught them to use, and then they put them back in school. Like, okay, well, just wait your turn. And so when things got worse, obviously, and at the end of 44, the danger had come down all the way down to even southern Germany, into these more rural areas. And so they took the children and they hid them in the Alps, in the mountains, close to the Austrian border, in a place called Schleching, small mountain village. They at that point they had no food whatsoever, and so they had run completely out of food. This was December 44, and they were eating. He tells that they were eating beet soup day in and day out. And they ran right through, and that's all they had. And so they were so desperate for food, the kids, that they resorted to stealing. So they would break into homes, and they successfully broke into a butcher shop and swiped, some ham and sausages, and were just kind of sharing them with each other. And then the SS shows up. This is February 45. So the war is, it's the last few months, right? Things are very, very desperate. They don't really know this because all they're hearing is radio, and all they're hearing is that the war's going great. and that the enemy is being defeated and victory is at hand, right? So, and that we are, and that the Russians are, closer, and so that it's, all forces need to be summed up to fight against the enemy, right? The invading Russians. And so that's what my father is hearing and believing. And in February, the SS shows up at this camp to, make sure these kids are ready. And they come with a lot of food because they've got good, a good depot with, good supplies. And one of my father's comrades or, schoolmates decides it's a good idea to steal food from the SS. So he goes out that night and he gets caught red-handed. And he swiped, it was like a half a pound of butter and a piece of ham. And what they didn't know is that carried the death penalty by firing squad, and that there was no mercy. And so the SS announced that they were all going to be summoned to watch the execution, and they executed the kid the next morning against the wall of the camp, and made all the kids watch.
Burn that into their brains, yeah.
Yeah, so that's when it really, I think, sunk in. That's, I think, where it got real for my father, that this was really ugly and scary. And he never forgot that. That's one trauma he carried for the rest of his life. And my mother even told me after his passing that is one of the things that he used to dream about repeatedly.
Wow.
Yeah.
I imagine so, yeah. Still a young man at that point, very young man, having to see his friend or his brother in arms at that point get executed. So
yeah, that was hard. And sure enough, a month later they get picked up. So they're 14 years old. So there's 3 of them, and they get picked up in an army, the equivalent of a Jeep, the German equivalent. I'm not sure what it was, but so they take them to the front, which the Russian front was next door. I mean, it was in Austria, right? And so next door. I mean, it didn't take them that long, right? So they did travel, but they got there relatively quickly, and he was immediately engaged in battle. And he didn't realize it until long after he got out, that he was involved in one of the more momentous battles at the end of the war, which was the precursor battle to the Battle of Vienna. So the Ukrainian army had advanced to Austria to liberate Vienna, and there was one city standing in between them and Vienna, and they fought them, and that city's name was Wiener Neustadt. My father was in that battle.
wow.
And the Germans got defeated and got pushed back, and then the Ukrainian army went into Vienna the next day. Right.
Wow.
So, and that's where my dad, he was told to dig a foxhole, and go in with his weapons, and they gave him 4 of these single shot weapons, 4 Panzerfaust. So if you ran out, you had there was no illusion of survival. There was absolutely no expectation. They gave him 4, and they gave him a machine gun with ammunition and the pistol, and they said, you keep the last bullet for yourself. That's where the book's title comes from. Because to be taken prisoner by the Russians is worse than death, because they will torture you before they kill you, and they will kill you.
Wow.
So that was, and it wasn't if, it was when, right? And so that, that's what happened. And, yes, sure enough, the tanks started rolling in. My father was a good shot, lucky for him, and managed to shoot all 4 that he could, and unfortunately watched in so doing many of his comrades getting crushed by the tanks. Right? You had to keep a very short distance. So I can't even imagine being in front of a tank. You had to be at 20 meters distance to shoot this weapon.
Wow.
20 meters is, what is that, 60 feet?
60 feet, yeah.
That's 60 feet from a T-34 Russian tank, right? So
it's moving at you, yeah.
That's moving, right? So, you know, he made it, and so then he shot all his ammunition, and he jumped out. He was literally left with the last bullet. That's all, and he kept it because, you know, that's what he'd been told. So he jumps out of the foxhole to get to safety because he's out of ammunition and he's trying to get out to the woods. And in that pandemonium, which, you know, I don't know how any soldier knows what is going on in battle, honestly, because it's got to be incredibly confusing. I think he knew more or less where he needed to run. So he jumps up, and the moment he jumps up, he is face to face within inches of a Russian soldier.
Wow.
Pointing his bayonet at him. So the Russians, foot soldiers, went behind the tanks with the bayonets. And so this one had made it to, you know, my father hadn't seen him. And my father saw that the bayonet was pointed at his gut. So instinctively he pushed with the machine gun, he pushed it off, and so deflected the bayonet that would have killed him. And instead it sliced his leg open. And in that instant, he said he looked at the kid's eyes, and he was a kid. The Russian was a kid too. He says he couldn't have been any older than him. And he shot him.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's how he survived. But he barely made it out of the battlefield because he was bleeding to death. Right. And his comrades, you know, running that had made it, saw him and tourniqueted his leg and dragged him back to safety.
Incredible story. Incredible that he was able to share this with you, and almost you can almost feel that you're there listening to it. So that's amazing. Yeah.
And he was 14. You got to think he was 14, right? So
14, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and at this time he has no notion of he didn't even know what unit he was in. He's just given a uniform. And they had the wrong uniform. I mean, they had nothing left, right? So he had that Africa Corps uniform, which was for the desert, and it was like yellow and brown. And so it stood out. He says he stood out like a sore thumb in the green meadows of Germany. So they were great targets for the Allied armies. And then what they did here, at this point, it's chaos, right? I mean, even though you were not supposed to utter the words "we may be losing," because you would get executed by your own unit. You could not say that. They obviously, well, whoever was left, and that wasn't very many of the unit, there was a lieutenant, I think, left, or a couple. They had heard in the radio that, that basically the Russians and the Americans were coming, and that there was going to be a demarcation line because they were going to set so that if they won, they were going to, divide up Germany, and that the Russians would keep a portion, the Americans another portion. That's what they were hearing. And so apparently there was a information about where that line was going to be, separating the Russian-controlled area from the American-controlled area. So his unit then decided to retreat to the American side that they hoped to reach, and they hoped to be right. And so they made their way back. They still fought in a number of battles. More things happened, but they did make it. So they crossed this bridge, right? So the demarcation line was in a small Austrian town called Lietzen, and it was north of the bridge. There was a river. North of the bridge was going to be the American side, and south of the bridge was going to be the Russian-controlled side. And they knew the Russians would kill them, so they figured, well, we might as well give ourselves up to the Americans. At least we might have a chance to survive. And they bet right. And so they made it across that bridge, unbeknownst to them. They crossed that bridge on May 7th, 1945.
Wow.
They woke up the next morning. They didn't know the war was over. They thought the war was on. The war had ended that night. They did not know this. So my father's like, they're doing shooting practice. They're in full gear. And my father goes into town after the practice and runs into an American Jeep. Like the American Jeep is posted in the middle of this town square with all the guns sticking out, with 4 guys in there. And everybody freezes, like in the movies. Everybody freezes. And my father said it's a good thing he didn't draw his gun. And it must have been seconds. He says the Americans just turned around and left.
Wow.
And he said, what happened? So he goes running to find his lieutenant, and he's yelling, and says, "Lieutenant, the Americans." And the guy, the lieutenant waves him down and says, Stop, Langbein. We just heard the war's over. We have a ceasefire. We lost. We got to give ourselves up. And my father says he just slumped to the ground, right? He just sat down. And he was, a minute ago, right? He was in full gear. He was supposed to be shooting these people. And he saw all these comrades die and witnessed and did, what the soldiers have to do. And all of a sudden now you don't shoot anymore. You're done.
You're done. Yeah.
So you lay down your arms. So they had a lot of, mixed, conflicting feelings. And that started that journey, right? So they, obviously I'm here. So my father clearly made it. He survived the war. They did give themselves up to the Americans, and that was, none of that was pleasant, right? I mean, this was not as it wouldn't be, right, in war. So a lot of things still happened to him at that point, but he did make it out alive, right? He did make it out alive after being taken prisoner by the Americans, and he was eventually released. He did almost starve to death, but made it back home, and then had to serve a year of mandatory farm labor. So he had to serve a year of forced farm labor. And what happened is that he missed some of what they call denazification, right? So they had these campaigns in schools to show the kids, I guess, how to be good democratic citizens and how, the regime was bad. So he kind of missed that, but he had seen the pictures. And then, so he finally gets back into school. He's, 2.5 years behind. Like many soldiers, right? You have to be reincorporated into civilian life and erase everything that happened. And just go back to normal, right? You're expected to go back to normal, right? And so, of course, that doesn't happen, right? And it's certainly not easy. And that's when he started putting 2 and 2 together, because he sees these teachers who just last year were extolling the virtues of Hitler. These are the same teachers now talking about democracy is wonderful. And he starts seeing, of course, the documentaries and the information flooding in. And at one point, he confronts his mother. Well, not confronts, but he asks her about, what happened to the neighbors. And that's when she told him the story. And that's when the coin really dropped. When his mother told him the story, he understood that it was all true.
Right.
And then he went into deep, deep depression for probably a whole year. Like he was being angry, didn't go to school, just lost. And this British soldier, because he was in the British section, right? The Allies had divided up Germany, and he was in the British section. British soldier, was able to just get him into a soccer group And my father actually was very talented in languages. He was a polyglot. He spoke, of course, not at that point, but he spoke English. He was one of the few kids who spoke English. So they'd learned it in school, but he had retained it because he was good at languages, and he ended up speaking 7 languages.
Wow.
He was able to communicate, and so this soldier told him, "Look, there's room for kids like you, right? You do have a future. Germany will eventually get rebuilt. Why not be part of that and maybe think of reuniting it into a broader Europe?" And that's what gave rise to NATO and what gave rise to the European Union in the end, right? And that's what my father participated in.
Wow.
So it gave him hope to do that, and he did.
An amazing piece of history that he was part of.
Yeah.
That's
well,
amazing.
he decided he couldn't do anything about the past. I think when
Right.
he finally just reconciled himself with the idea, but he thought maybe he could do something about the future.
It's outstanding, and his ways of his education, his language skills, and his lawyer skills kept him on the right side of things and pushing for the right advocacy going forward. And that's amazing that he was able to do that, even after going through everything he went through as a young man, 13 years old, into going to be conscripted and going to war and facing death, but 60 feet away from death, basically 4 rounds, 10 killing rounds, and making it out of that, getting stabbed with the bayonet, making it out of that. He was a survivor. That's what he was the whole time. He was a survivor, and he kept surviving so that he can help others on the other side of this, and he did. So that's outstanding.
Yeah, he and much to his credit, right? He never deviated from that. Of course, the scars, the psychological scars were there. I just didn't recognize. I didn't know why my father was, emotionally unavailable. Right? I didn't know why my family was dysfunctional, because they were. Because my mother was the product of the Spanish Civil War, so she was no better off, right? And so these were, just damaged people, right? But they made the best of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's all you can do, right? Is try.
Yeah, you got to keep pushing forward, and learn from those mistakes and learn from the lessons that you were given. Not that you chose those lessons, but you were given those lessons, learn those lessons and push forward. And I think both of them did that well. And because you wouldn't be here right now if they didn't.
Yeah. And I guess my small contribution, I did feel a growing sense of responsibility somehow, that I had to maybe do something too.
Yeah.
And so I found a late talent for writing. and so that's what I'm dedicating my spare time to doing, is to preserve these stories for the generations.
Outstanding. We've got a few questions from the audience that popped in while you were speaking. The first one's a pretty good question, I think. It's from Free Willy Best Ever. Must be a movie buff. If you could ask your father one more question today, what would it be? Thank you, Free Willy.
Wow. I would ask him, what would you do to prevent another war?
That's a good question. Yeah. It's a really
Probably no good answer, but yeah. I would have liked to ask him that question. I never did.
I'm sure he would have had a good answer for you. It might not be the answer that would solve the world, but he'd give you an answer.
Well, he was a man of strong opinions, so I'm sure he's an opinion. He probably would have said, "Yeah, I got to get some of these leaders replaced."
Definitely. All right, our next one is from Dan Verigo. What moment while writing the book affected you the most emotionally?
Oof. I get emotional sometimes, even still today, talking about it. Just the fact that we continue to do this to each other over and over again, and that I saw it in my own sort of flesh and blood, right, in my own history, up and down. And I married a military man, right? It's just it's everywhere. And I have a son, right, who, decided not to join the military. But he could have, right? And if conscription were to come back, right, or if you get the draft back, then he's certainly of age, right? So these are things that I think every parent needs to consider too.
Definitely. Next one is from Change the Narrative. How has sharing your father's story changed your life? Thank you, Change.
Yeah, in very unexpected ways. I never thought I would be capable, first of all, of getting my dad to cough up the story.
Yes.
Second, that I would ever write a book. This was not, I had never planned on doing that. And then, so that gave me, sort of a mission, right, that I didn't even know I had. Is so this sense of responsibility now turned into, the notion that I can do my little bit, right, to perhaps contribute to at least awareness, right, awareness, reflection, to perhaps look for a better way of doing things. And so that's tremendously changed my life. And it's also changed it in a way that not only do I feel like, well, I can at least make a small contribution, it's that these people came to me. So all of these people come to me now wanting to tell their story. And I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
And so enriches my own life, right? And so I want to definitely continue, bringing these stories forward, and I will continue. So if the anthology does well, I've got, more folks that want to tell me stories, and I welcome those stories. Perhaps we can do another book.
Yeah. That would be great. And can't wait to hear the second wave that comes out next year. I can't wait to hear that one. And then, of course, the one after that, because it's going to keep coming. People are going to keep wanting to share.
Yeah.
That's
And
awesome.
from different countries, different places. So I haven't even looked at the Pacific theater yet. This is all from the European theater. But the stories are from, a Jewish girl and a British girl and a German kid and a Dutch kid and a British kid. So they're from all over. So they bring very different perspectives too, which is interesting because, the truth is in the eye of the beholder, and everybody experiences things differently, right? So very interesting to see the different angles.
Yeah.
But one thing is universal, and that's the suffering and the devastation, right?
Oh, yes.
And then on the other hand, the resilience, right, and the hope that people have, the determination to just pull through and make things better.
Definitely. It definitely is the determination to make things better and hopefully not have to go through that same suffering again.
That's the hope, yeah.
Our last question, it looks like, from the audience, from Salvatourism. What message of hope do you believe your father would want today's generation to hear?
I think he would want to encourage everybody to do their bit, whatever it is, whatever their contribution might be. Just don't give up. Just whatever small thing you think you may be able to contribute. And that's even it's just maybe helping the neighbor, right?
Yeah.
Or, donating or whatever it is in our power to do. What every little thing contributes to a better world. I think that because that's what he dedicated his life to doing, for whatever it's worth, right? So I think that's what his message would be. Don't ever stop doing that. Yeah.
Nice. That's amazing. Heidi, it's been great chatting with you about the book, about your father, about your journey to, I guess, gather the story and make it into the memoir. And now what you're going to do next. It's been awesome, and the audience obviously loved it. What's the best way for the audience to maybe get in contact with you if they want you on their show or if they just want to chat with you?
Oh, well, you can go to my website. I know my name is sort of a mouthful, but it's HeidiLangbein.author.com, right? So my website has a way to contact me. It's got a contact me page, and I am happy to speak. And I don't, it's not. None of this is for money, right? So I'll be happy to speak. I have spoken at historical associations, at Rotary clubs, at book clubs. Any venue, I have given actually presentations at Holocaust centers, and love doing it because I think it is important to give the message, and the ability to contact me would be through my website.
Outstanding. And the website is going across the bottom of the screen right now. So you can screenshot that, and it's also been in the chat about 4 times during the show as well. So you can reach back in there and see that as well, and make sure you get in contact with Heidi to share her story. And again, on your show, or maybe just to share some tidbits with you on how to maybe put a memoir together.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to share. Yes.
Yes. And Heidi, the last question for me from the Misfit Nation is, what's 3 things the Misfit Nation, our audience, can start doing tomorrow to be better people?
Oh, my goodness. Well, that's a bit of a tall order. I just, maybe just on that theme, right? Perhaps we're able to, help somebody who needs somebody's sick. Maybe the neighbor needs something. Maybe you donate time, right, to a charity or whatever. I guess your talent is, right. Perhaps there's something you can do, and so there could be. So I think I probably mentioned more than 3 already, but yes,
knocked it out. Knocked it out in 1 sentence. That was good. Thank you, Heidi. This has been great tonight. A great story. Reach back out to us when the next book comes out. We'll get you back on either with me or the Tuesday crew, Jake and Steven, on Tuesday nights, so you get a different perspective of our platform.
Oh, I would be really excited to do that. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you again for the opportunity to have me on your platform and allow me to share the message. Yeah.
No problem. You have a great rest of your evening. Out there in San Diego, I can still see the sun behind you, so it's nice there.
Yes, it's still nice and light out there.
Yeah, I can hear the fireworks going off behind me, so I guess it's getting dark out here. So,
right.
So thanks again for hanging out with us tonight, Misfit Nation. Please check out the Save the Last Bullet by Heidi. It's probably available on Amazon, I'm guessing, and yes, of course through the website as well.
Yep.
And Misfit Nation, I know this weekend wasn't easy for everybody. The loud noises, the fireworks kind of trigger some people. But if you're feeling that darkness caving in on you, please do not make a permanent decision to a temporary problem. Reach out for help. Dial 988. Phone a friend. Reach into your wallet. Take out those 3 names we tell you to write down and call them. They want you here tomorrow. We want you here tomorrow. If you don't want to do that, reach out to us. info@themisfitnation.com, Steven@themisfitnation.com, or Jake@themisfitnation.com. We will keep you on the line until someone close to you can take care of you and make sure you're here with us tomorrow. Because a day with you tomorrow is 100% better than one without you. Until next time, be humble, stay hungry, and keep hustling.
Thanks for checking us out and being a part of the Misfit Nation show. Don't forget to visit our website at themisfitnation.com. That's themisfitnation.com. Check out all our past episodes and get some of the great Misfit Nation gear for you and your family. As always, be humble, stay hungry, and keep hustling, because we are Misfit Nation. Misfit Nation.